Ladies and gentlemen, let us all rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President and the Senators of the Republic of the Philippines.
Hindi. Suspend ko. Wala quorum. The 56th session of the Senate in the first regular session of the 18th Congress is hereby called to order. Let us pause for a minute of silent prayer. Thank you. Secretary, will please call the roll.
Roll call of members, the Honorable Senators Angara, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, De La Rosa, Drilon, Gatchalian, Go, Gordon, Ontiveros, Lacson, Lapid, Marcos, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Tolentino, Villanueva, Villar, Zubiri, Senate President Soto III.
Sana? With 18 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader?
Mr. President, move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 55th Session, Monday, February 17, 2020. Consider the same as approved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair hears none. The motion is approved. Journal is approved.
Mr. President, we'd just like to recognize the gallery. We have here today with us the Mayor of Kawit Cavite, Mayor Angelo Emilio Aguinaldo, together with Councilor Jerry Jarin and Attorney Antonio.
Before we acknowledge your guests, let me correct the number. We had 19 senators present. Senator Pangilinan was here on the side.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right.
And Attorney Antonio Margallo, the guests of Senator Go from Kawit Cavite. We also have COP leaders from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, headed by the hardworking congressman for the party list cooperative sector, Congressman Ben Canama is here also with us. And I believe, they have also members from the MSU, NMPC, Iligan City, BSU Community Multipurpose Cooperative, Zamboanga del Norte Provincial Government Multipurpose Cooperative, Climbs Insurance Corporation, Mass Spec Cooperative Development Center, Padada Water System Cooperative, San Dionisio Credit Cooperative, that's a very big cooperative, Mr. President, in Parañaque, and the Philippine Cooperative Center. We're here with us today.
All right, thank you. We would like to welcome our guests to the Senate this afternoon. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
The Secretary will proceed with the reference of business.
Reference of business, bills on first reading. Senate Number 1348 entitled An Act Requiring the Establishment of a Permanent Clinic for Every Public School and Appropriating Funds Therefore, introduced by Senator Pacquiao.
Referred to the Committees on Basic Education, Health, and Finance.
Senate Number 1349, an act amending Republic Act Number 8762, otherwise known as the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Trade,
Resolution. PS Resolution Number 325, entitled Resolution Directing the Senate Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs to conduct investigation in aid of legislation into the series of vehicular accidents involving drivers who tested positive for drug use and whose reckless, irresponsible, and negligent driving resulted to the death of or have inflicted critical injuries to a number of individuals and have caused damage to property for the purpose of recommending further remedial measures to ensure road safety and end the proliferation of drug use in the country, particularly in the public transport sector, introduced by Senator De La Rosa.
referred to the Committees on Public Order and Public Services. There is additional reference of business.
Additional reference of business, bills on first reading, Senate Number 1350, an act upgrading the position of Provincial Science and Technology Officer into the Provincial Science Director in the Department of Science and Technology, amending Republic Act Number 6959, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Binay.
Referred to the Committees on Science and Technology, Civil Service, and Finance.
Senate Number 1351, an act institutionalizing rainwater harvesting system in Metro Manila and major cities in the Philippines and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Binay.
Referred to the Committee on Public Works and Finance.
Senate Number 1352, an act mandating banking institutions to strengthen the financing system for agricultural, fisheries, and rural development in the Philippines, introduced by Senator Lapid.
Referred to the Committee on Agriculture and the Committee on Banks.
Senate Number 1353, an act further expanding the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Trial Courts, Municipal Trial Courts in Cities, Municipal Trial Courts, and Municipal Circuit Trial Courts, amending for the purpose Batas Pambansa Bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Organization Act of 1980, as amended, introduced by Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Justice.
Senate Number 1355, an act amending Sections 3 and 4, Presidential Decree Number 1631, Series of 1979, or the Act creating the Lungsod ng Kabataan as amended by Executive Order Number 893, Series of 1983, introduced by Senator Angara.
To the Committee on Health.
Senate Number 1356, an act increasing the bed capacity of the Philippine General Hospital from 1,500 beds to 2,200 beds and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Angara.
To the Committee on Health and Finance.
Senate Number 1358, an act integrating labor education in the senior high school curriculum, introduced by Senator Villanueva.
To the Committee on Higher Education and Labor.
Senate Number 1359, entitled An Act Further Expanding the Jurisdiction of Metropolitan Trial Courts, Municipal Trial Courts in Cities, Municipal Trial Courts, and Municipal Circuit Trial Courts, amending for the purpose Batas Pambansa Bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Organization Act of 1980, as amended, introduced by Senator Gordon.
To the Committee on Justice.
Committee reports. Committee report number 49, prepared and submitted by the Committee on Justice and Human Rights on Senate number 1354 with Senator Soto III, Lacson, De Lima, and Gordon, authors thereof, entitled An Act Amending Articles 183 and 184 of Act number 3815 as amended, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 8, 28, 373, and 1330, sponsor Senator Gordon.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report number 50, prepared and submitted by the Committee on Ways and Means on Senate number 1357 with Senator Zubiri, Recto, Angara, and Cayetano as authors thereof, entitled An Act Reforming the Corporate Tax and Incentive System, amending for the purpose sections 4, 20, 27, 28, 34, and 290 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended, and creating therein new title 13 and for other purposes, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 535, 595, and 702, taking into consideration House number 4157, sponsor Senator Cayetano.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Mr. Majority Leader, where is the bamboo?
Mr. President, the bamboo had asked for rest today. So he requested if it can be taken up another day.
All right.
Not so resilient today.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, Mr. President, that's a very comprehensive bamboo measure. But Mr. President, with the permission of Senator Lacson, I know his first item on the agenda, we have colleagues who who requested if they can just sponsor certain measures, Mr. President, with the permission of Senator Lacson, to give sponsorship speeches on their measures. Therefore, Mr. President, I move with the permission of the body to transfer from the calendar of ordinary business to the calendar for special orders committee report number 46 under Senate Bill number 1341. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 1341.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is in order.
But we ask the Secretary, Mr. President,
The
to read the
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act allowing and regulating the use of motorcycles as public utility vehicles, amending for this purpose Republic Act number 4136, otherwise known as the Land Transportation and Traffic Code, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, may we recognize the sponsor, the distinguished lady Senator, Senator Grace Poe, to sponsor the measure.
Senator Grace Poe, the distinguished lady from San Juan and Negros, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I present to the body the amendments to the Republic Act number 4136, or the Land Transportation and Traffic Code. This is a 1964 law which did not foresee the population boom and its attendant traffic congestion in such proportions that we have today. 56 years ago, hindi pa po ako marami sa ating pinapanganak noon, at ang sikat pa ay ang kabayo na ginagamit sa mga pelikula. No one could have also foreseen the ease in communications and the rise of technology we so depend on these days. Right now, anyone can get motorcycles for hire anywhere, sa apps, Facebook groups, maging sa pinaka-malapit na kanto ng mga opisina ng mga manggagawang pagod ng maipit sa traffic araw-araw. Bukod pa ito sa mga motorsiklong ginagamit para magpa-deliver ng pagkain at gamit na hindi rin nasasaklaw ng kasalukuyang batas. Ayon sa datos ng Land Transportation Office, mayroong humigit kumulang 18.8 milyong motorsiklo na bumubuo sa 71% ng rehistradong sasakyan sa bansa. Isa sa bawat 3 Pilipino household ay may motorsiklo at 51% dito ay ginagamit para sa kabuhayan. Mayroong ding 134 na habal-habal terminal sa Metro Manila pa lang. Kung may ganito kalaking supply, ibig sabihin may demand. Ito mismo ang dahilan kung bakit nating gustong kilalanin ang motorsiklo bilang pampublikong sasakyan. Their numbers grew as traffic conditions worsened. Demand remained high even without a law regulating operations. Legalization and regulation will help address safety risks present in both registered motorcycles for hire and the colorums or habal-habal. It will also improve commuter welfare by giving them the option to choose legitimate service providers, which will then encourage the habal-habal drivers to migrate to a regulated system in order to improve their services. Regulation also entails accountability. Like all other public utility vehicles, we will require drivers to undergo rigorous training, strictly regulate those who will be allowed to drive motorcycles for hire services, and ensure that only up-to-date, up-to-standard motorcycles will be utilized. Katulad rin ng ibang mga pampublikong sasakyan, kadalasan ay hindi ang sasakyan mismo ang problema, kundi ang mismong mga drivers. At least 10 other countries, France, Thailand, Indonesia, India, Vietnam, Cambodia, East Africa, Nigeria, Brazil, and Mexico already legalized their motorcycles for hire. This global trend shows that motorcycles can be safe given a properly implemented regulatory framework which puts safety as its top priority. The optimal track, of course, is to always push for better mass transportation system. Pero habang hindi pa natin napeperpekto o naaayos ng mabuti ang ating mass transportation, ang ating mga bus, ang ating mga train system, ay kailangan ng alternatibong pampublikong masasakyan ang ating mga kababayan. Ano na, 2020 na, It is about time that we harness the power of technology to help us address mobility issues in terms of numbers alone. Shared motorcycles are an untapped resource that we should take advantage of. With the unity of mind of the many senators that filed, I would like to acknowledge Senator Recto, Senator Marcos, Senator Angara, Senator Villanueva, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, and a manifestation by Senator Gordon to co-author. And the support of these senators, I am proud to present to the body for its consideration the legalization of motorcycles for hire. Isabatas na po natin ang pampublikong motorsiklo, and we will seek for the guidance of the Senate President who drives himself to work every day. I'm sure he has good inputs on the limitations and also on the rights for the new motorcycle for hire law. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, several members would like to sponsor the measure. We recognize our Senate President Pro Tem, Senator Ralph Recto.
Senator Ralph Recto is recognized, the President Pro Tem.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, throughout history, legislation has always marched behind technology. It has always been innovation first, regulation later. And most often, government intervention follows this Reagan doctrine. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. And when confronted with something new or unfamiliar, toy with the idea of prohibiting it. In the case of airplanes, it did not have a smooth takeoff as a sanctioned passenger carrier. Like biplanes flying through the clouds then, it met turbulence along the way to being permitted by the government to fly, paying human cargo. But you know what? From trains to planes to automobiles, it was government regulation which made them safe through the years. And such, and I say this with certainty, will be the case of motorcycle taxis. This bill, condensed from 5 measures, bravely confronts a phenomenon that is here and now. This is not about merely ratifying what is already existing. The act of Congress to permit and regulate what is now in operation is not a fait accompli. On the contrary, this bill and the implementing rules it would birth would improve the status quo, resulting in a public transport that is safe for the driver, the passenger, and other users of the road. Mr. President, ours is a motorcycle republic. 7 in 10 motor vehicles today run on 2 wheels. At almost 19 million, there is 1 motorbike per family. There are more motors than Carabaos today. The likes of Hondas have long outnumbered our horses. And half of these motorcycles are used for livelihood, to deliver food for the perpetually hungry millennial, deliver packages, and as tricycles that bring people to work or produce to market. In upland villages in Mindanao, people even ride tandem dahil 10 sila, in circus-like fashion, in bikes with wings or outriggers that they look like land bangkas. These are the mountain summiting habal-habals and skylabs in Mindanao. They've been there for 4 decades in their stratospheric routes. And there's this relatively new urban phenomenon, the motorcycle taxi, that zips one paying passenger through our city's gridlocked roads. Like all inventions, the motorcycle taxi is a product of necessity. When the time to queue for an MRT ticket is longer than the ride itself, when buses are packed like spam, hindi na po sardinas, when rides are hard to come by, that one has to wake up by 4 in the morning so he can be at work by 8 and leave by 5 in the afternoon with no guarantee that he can be home by 9, then relief comes in the form of an empty seat behind the motorcycle driver. There were many independent contractors before some entrepreneurs married ICT with a bike to create a hailing app driven by well-trained, carefully curated drivers. In practice, courtesy of the pilot period government gave them, they proved that with right driver training, a motorcycle can indeed be a safe ride. There remains one roadblock, though, for them to operate legitimately, and that is the more than half a century old law which bans a motorized two-wheeler as a for-hire vehicle. If this provision in Republic Act 4136 will not be deleted, then millions of de facto motorcycle riders cannot be flagged off as legal paying passenger vehicles. But delisting them, Mr. President, is just part of what is needed to decolorize this big subset of the land transport sector. Congress, as the rule-setting body, must also lay down the minimum specifications of a motorcycle taxi, one with safety as the main benchmark. And this bill sets it from engine size to minimum speed to build to weight. This is the basic set of rules and requirements which the Land Transportation, Franchising, and Regulatory Board should build on, which will cover not only the vehicle specs, but the skill and training a driver must demonstrate before he or she can be licensed. This bill, however, is not a mother of all franchise that will mass legalize motorcycle taxis in one stroke of the pen. Drivers will still have to secure a certificate of public convenience or a special permit from the LTFRB. This bill is also in response to the call of the DOTR that for as long as the ban in Republic Act 4136 exists, their hands are tied in legalizing the likes of angkas, joyride, and others. True, for the river cannot rise above the spring. Mr. President, the bike was and is apparently the ride of choice of the President. He is our biker-in-chief. And by safely logging tens of thousands of kilometers in crisscrossing Mindanao and the Visayas, he had demonstrably shown that motorbike as a safe ride. Although hundreds of cc's separate the bikes they ride in general, what is good for the President must be good for the ordinary citizen. So let us pass this bill, my dear colleagues, not only for the sake of the President, but for the people. And finally, for the record, Mr. President, I continue to ride bikes. It was what I used in courting the lady who would later become my wife. Thank you, Mr. President.
We'd like to also
Majority
recognize Senator Francis Tolentino, and after that, Senator Bongo.
Senator Francis Tolentino, the gentleman from Cavite, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, bilang dating taong kalye at laging nanonood po sa daloy ng trapiko dito sa Kalakhang, Maynila, matagal ko pong nasubaybayan ang paghihirap ng ating mga mananakay, lalong-lalo na pag rush hour, papasok mula sa Cubao, papunta po ng Makati at pabalik. Kaya naniniwala po ako na this is a very timely and much-needed measure, Mr. President, that will regulate the operation of motorcycles for hire in order to serve the needs of the riding public, not just in Metro Manila, but nationwide. Motorcycles have long been used in public transportation, long before the angkas and other online hailing applications. We have already the habal-habal, as enunciated by the previous sponsors. Motorcycle taxis are also used as a form of public transportation in other countries. In Vietnam, motorcycle taxis are called xe ôm. With over 45 million motorcycles, Vietnam represents the largest motorbike market by sales in the world. In Indonesia, they call it ojeks, which serve as an informal means for moving people around the city. And in 2019, the government has started to regulate its fares. Meanwhile, in Thailand, they still call it motor sairap chang, and is also regulated by the said country. Institutionalizing motorcycles for hire will not only provide ease and convenience in commute, but more importantly, it will ensure a viable and alternative mode of transportation for our many kababayans who every day wage a battle against traffic in Metro Manila and other urban areas, Mr. President, and also for those who use habal-habal and Skylab in rural areas. It is estimated that there are now over 20 million motorcycle taxis in more than 100 countries as of 2017, and according to World Bank, this will increase by more than 50% over the next 5 years. Given the changing landscape, Mr. President, and the rising needs of the commuting public, there is a need to respond to its challenges and regulate the same. As legislators, we have a mandate to craft our laws in response to the times. For as Abraham Lincoln once said, legislation must follow and conform to the progress of society. As chairman of the Committee on Local Government and as a co-author of this measure, therefore it is my belief that this bill will be of invaluable addition to our legal arsenal in our pursuit of an accessible and affordable public transportation for an improved quality of life for the Filipino people. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Mr. President, Senator Bongo after. After
All right,
which Senator
the
Bongo.
gentleman from Davao, Senator Christopher Bongo, is recognized.
After which, Mr. President, will be Senator Richard Gordon.
All right.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, it is my honor to co-sponsor Senate Bill number 1341 under Committee Report 46, which seeks to allow and regulate public utility motorcycles. Mr. President, the worsening traffic situation in urban areas around the country, especially in Metro Manila, has compelled our countrymen to look for alternative modes of transportation. Demand for and use of motorcycles have increased dramatically as they are more mobile, affordable, and accessible than other vehicles. Although Transportation Network Vehicle Service, TNVS, has transformed the transportation landscape in the Philippines, the use of motorcycles to ferry passengers was initially banned due to a 55-year-old law that prohibits the use of motorcycles for hire. Commuters therefore have resorted to informal and unregulated mode commonly known as habal-habal. Considering public interest and the safety of passengers, the Department of Transportation saw the need to conduct a study to assess the viability of motorcycles for hire. Pilot implementation began in June 2019. Consequently, the TWG, or Technical Working Group, has opened up the program to include other participants to be able to establish a benchmark analysis and provide Congress with valuable inputs. But several issues came up that forced the TWG to recommend the termination of the program. However, I, together with my colleagues in the Senate, have requested the OTR Secretary Tugade and LTFRB Chair Delgra to extend the operation of the motorcycle program. Mr. President, I am grateful that they have heeded our calls and did not continue with the termination. While I support allowing and regulating motorcycles for hire or motorcycle PUVs, I also want to underscore that road safety is a paramount importance. The World Health Organization reported in 2018 that 90% of casualties in motorcycle accidents were due to riders or passengers not wearing helmets. As chairperson of Committee on Health, this is unacceptable. It is important to ensure the safety of both the rider and passenger by having them abide by road safety standards and regulations. The government should therefore impose stringent regulations and strict monitoring on the compliance of motorcycle riders and passengers to ensure their safety. Mr. President, bilang rider ng scooter nga lang, gusto ko po sanang gamitin ang pagkakataong ito para mapasalamatan ang ating mga riders sa kanilang kontribusyon sa pagpalago ng ating ekonomiya at sa kanilang tulong para magsilbing alternatibong transportasyon sa panahon ng ating pangangailangan. This proposed measure will help thousands of previously unregulated habal-habal drivers in our country by enabling them to become part of the formal economy. Mr. President, I support the passage of this measure in the name of public interest and the safety of the riders. With that, Mr. President, I call on my fellow senators to amend Republic Act number 4136 or the Land Transportation and Traffic Code of 1964 to allow the operation of motorcycle PUVs here in the country. Rather than banning and declaring motorcycle for hire as illegal, the state should regulate the use of such vehicles to make sure that it becomes a safe and sustainable option for transportation, not only for commuters but also for the riders and pedestrians. I commend the good sponsor for pushing for this legislation, and allow me also to convey at this point my intention to become co-author of this proposed measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
The gentleman from Zambales and Red Cross, Senator Richard Gordon, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. First of all, I'd like to commend the chairman of the Committee on Public Services for having come out with a speedy remedy for something that has really knocked on our door for a long time. Mr. President, I'd like to say here, na talang dapat sabihin natin dito, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. This country seems to be running in order to stay in place. Tumatakbo tayo para lang makasabay sa Agos at nahuhuli pa tayo. Hindi umaandar. Now, for the last several years, as population grew, there seems to be an absence of what the future lies ahead. Kaya ano nangyayari sa atin, gumagawa ng paraan ng mga mamamayang Pilipino para maibsan ang kanilang pangangailangan. Halimbawa po, ang OFW, nagawa yan dahil wala tayong maibigay na trabaho dito sa ating bayan. Hindi ko sasabihin na mali yung mga polisiya ng ekonomiya nung araw na hindi nakapag-create ng trabaho. Naglagay tayo ng economic zones para makahabol, pero kinapos pa rin yun. At ngayon, babawasan pa natin yung incentive, baka lalo tayong madala sa mas mabigat na sitwasyon. So having said that, Mr. President, yung OFW, ngayon, ang traffic natin, talagang humahabol tayo, naglagay tayo ng mga LRT, MRT ng mga nakaraan, pero nakita natin, hindi pa rin sapat, Mr. President. Nasisira, at in fact, kulang na kulang sa vision. Sabi sa Biblia, kung hindi ako nagkakamali, at I will have Joel Villanueva correct me if I'm wrong, where there is no vision, people perish. Nahihirapan ang tao kung wala tayong tinatawag na vision at hindi natin pinaghahandaan, Mr. President. May I ask my fraternity brother to hold on to his horses so I can concentrate on an extemporaneous speech, Mr. President, before I ask him that he be declared in, never mind, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, hindi natin namamalayan na dumadaan ang panahon na nagigiba lahat ang ating mga pangarap sapagkat naghahabol lang tayo. Naghahabol tayo sa fuel. Wala tayong mga pagkakataon na magbago ng mga pangangailangan natin sa ating bayan. At I'm glad tumatango-tango ito si Senator Angara sapagkat yung tatay niya naging kasama ko sa CONCON at noon pa namin pinag-uusapan na dapat maghanda tayo sa kakulangan ng fuel at yan lumabas yung mga bill namin ni Senator Subiri, yung mga alternative fuels, Mr. President, alternative energy sources. But I think the basic thing here is kulang tayo sa preparasyon. Kulang tayo sa plano. Kahapon, nag-committee hearing kami doon kay Senator Gatchalian tungkol dito sa NGCP. Ano lumalabas doon, sir? Wala tayong ni plano for cyber warfare. Hindi tayo nagpapaaral ng mga bata para makapag-aral kung ano ang dapat natin gawin para sa cyber warfare. Nag-uusap itong dalawa, sir. Naguguluhan ako. Pasensya na kayo. At ibig sabihin, we have to really plan ahead na dapat nakikita natin, nakakailangan natin yung mga cyber experts, huling-huli tayo. There was a young PMA graduate yesterday that impressed me. He went to the university in London. Pagbalik niya dito, nakakaintindi siya. Pero ilan sa atin nakakaintindi niyan. Ganun rin ang nangyari dito. I can cite many, many things. Ang ating sundalo tayo na sundalo, bigay tayo ng pension, tapos ngayon naghahabol tayo ng pension, pero hindi natin binigyan yung dapat na gamitin nila na armas, at makikita nyo kung pupuntahan ko pa yan, hanggang sa bases, pinaalis natin ang base, hindi tayo handa. Ngayon naalisin ang VFA, ewan ko kung handa tayo because wala tayo mga mga high-performance jet planes at barko. Now, I'm not saying we're weak. Parang Patrick Henry yan. Sabi ni Patrick Henry, they tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so, noble an adversary. So, ang adversary natin po ay ating sarili. Kulang na kulang tayo nga. Ngayong araw na ito, I think it should really be mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Because ang nangyayari sa atin, Ngayon, maghahabol tayo. Alam natin, bira naman yung mga dalubhasang mga ganoon na motorsiklo katulad ni General Bato. Tumatayo pa sa motorsiklo yan at naguhubad ng pantalon habang nasa katayo sa motorsiklo. Nakita ko siya nakatayo sa motorsiklo at magaling magmotorsiklo. Nag-exhibition, in other words, si Senator Recto, ilan mga pasahero ang sumasakay sa kanyang motorsiklo, babae o lalaki, di ko na malaman, pero sinabi niya, nagyayabang dito kanina na siya yung gumagamit ng motorsiklo at dyan niya raw nakuha si V. Yan. So, At iba pa? No, si V lang. You know, this...
1,200. 1,200. BMW 1,200.
Is it VMW, sir, or
BMW.
BMW? It's V.
B.
All of the above. Now, Mr. President, I would like to state here that I enthusiastically support this even if, alam ko, delikado. However, this must serve as a temporary measure. Napilitan na tayo rito. Nag-uusap kami ni Senator Tolentino kanina. Ang tao dito sa Metro Manila, 14 million at night, 11 million during the daytime. Now, when you start thinking, and we've discussed this many times, Mr. President, yung mga tao natin, manggagaling sa ibang lugar, darating pa, huli. Can you imagine the stress early in the morning, papasok kayo, tapos wala kang makuha sa sakyan, huli ka, tatakutin ka ba na baka matanggal ka, and then pagdating sa bahay, gabing-gabi na, dahil hindi makasakay, doon lang sila makakapag-usap ng kanilang kamag-anak, hindi katulad ni Senator Villar, na de kotse, makakauwi at any time, kaya hindi na nakikinig sa akin dito. Having said that, Mr. President, you know me naman, Mr. President, biro lang yan, pero buti na yung sinasabi ang totoo. Now, Mr. President, I would like to say, therefore,
Jokes are half meant.
yes, Your Honor. I would like to say, hindi pa rin tumitigil eh. Anyway, seatmate ko yan, kaya I love her dearly. But anyway, Mr. President, sinasabi ko lang po na tayo ngayon ay napaparusahan ng ating kakulangan sa vision. Nahihirapan ang tao. Ano ang naging polisiya? Hindi ng gobyerno, ngunit ng tao na mismo. Humahawak na lang sa patalim, pupunta abroad, dahil kulang ang trabaho. Papasok sa ibang lugar, lahat umaasa na makapasok doon. Dito ngayon, hahawak tayo sa patalim ulit, pwedeng mabunggo. Ano gusto natin? Walang prangkisa, pag nabangga, walang insurance. Kaya mabuti na may konting control tayo kaysa wala. And at the same time, may choice ang tao. This is very democratic, Mr. President. The people have a right to choose. If there is a problem na hindi na nila masolve, pipili sila ngayon ng sasakyan ko. Sasakay ako sa LRT, siksikan. Marami pang ginagawang kalokohan doon. Kumisan, hindi aabot. Gusto ko makapabili ako na makakapasok ako na alam ko may susundo na sa akin at dadalhin ako sa trabaho. Now, an example of this, Mr. President, sinasabi kong positive vision, ay yung ating mga tao, inuunahan pa ng foreigner, ng foreigner, to be facetious about it, or to be, Bakit? Ang papapasok pa rito, Indonesian company pa ang dirig ko eh. Doon sa angkas eh. Merong Grab. Bakit hindi magawa ng ating mga kabayan? Because ano nangyayari sa atin, aasa na lang palagi sa gobyerno. Kaya hindi tayo nagiging entrepreneurial. Kung entrepreneurial ang tao, ang dali-daling hawakan ng Pilipino yan na tayo mismo ang siyang susundo sa ating mga kapwa pasahero. Now again, Mr. President, my support here is based on the fact that when the time comes when we finally see that we have vision, we have a third eye, so to speak, dahil hindi nakakakita yung dalawang mata natin, when the time comes, Mr. President, then I think we should now start regulating and we should look closely, monitor kung ilan ang na-aksidente, kung ilan ang tumatapon. And when we apply this, Mr. President, lahat dapat tinatawag na helmet at kung kinakailangan additional safeguards ay magawa yan. Mr. President, I commend the people from Mindanao. Sa Mindanao, nagkaroon na sila ng habal-habal nung araw pa. Yung habal-habal nila, may pakpak pa, magkabila. Skylab. Oh, alam na alam ni, sasabihin mamaya ni General Bato rito, nung araw siya ay nag-skylab. Pero siya may negosyo doon, actually. Pero anyway, Mr. President, biro lang yun again. The point is, ang Pilipino kayang mag-adjust. Pero kailangan lang, bigyan natin ng pagkakataon na makita nila anong ginagawa ng mga Department of Trade. Dapat nakikita ng Department of Trade na punong-puno na ang Maynila dapat magsasuggest sila, ito ang mga negosyo natin pwedeng puntahan. Kaya dumami ang pagkain eh. Ang dami natutong magluto dahil dumami ang population, maraming restaurant. Ito dapat nasabi na ng DTI, di ko sinisisi, na dapat magtingin tayo ng mga negosyo na tayo ang magpapatakbo, hindi other countries. So, Mr. President, out of, again, the force of circumstance, the Filipino once again has proven na he can last. Manny Pacquiao had to be a boxer, Mr. President, because wala siyang choice. Poverty is an absence of choice. And the hard choice he has to make was to commit himself to being the most skillful boxer in the whole world. And he worked hard for it. He perspired for it. He got hit for it. So, Mr. President, ito ang situation natin sa Pilipinas. It's up to us in the Senate, this very, very sepulcher of democracy, na tayo dapat mismo ang siyang hahanap ng mga paraan para makagawa tayo ng tulong sa ating mga kababayan. So, Mr. President, madali sa akin sabihin to because I feel it, I know it, I see it happen, and I would like to commend the Filipino for his real resistance and his consistency in trying to make do with very little. I really do not like making them reliant upon us, but we really have to come out with avenues upon which we can create, for example, money for cyber scholars, Mr. President, that we can send abroad. The Japanese did that very well. The Koreans did that very well. They sent their people abroad to learn the technology of other countries, and they brought it back, and they made it made in Japan and made in Korea. It's not because there are bases, and they still have bases, but because they decided to become innovative. They decided to become visionary, Mr. President. If we do not do that, we will perish as a nation. We will become simply hewers of wood and water bearers na nakikita natin sa mga probinsya natin, nag-iigib pa ng tubig hanggang ngayon sapagkat kulang na kulang tayo sa advance doon sa tubig. So, Mr. President, again, my commendations to the Committee on Public Service, my commendations to the other speakers, Bongo and Senator Tolentino, and I'm sure we are going to pass this, and I'm sure we must learn from it. Man learns from his mistakes. That's why God never learns, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Any more responses? Mr. President, with the permission of Senator Grace Poe and all the co-sponsors, co-authors, if we can be made co-authors as well, myself together with Senator Nancy Binay, Senator Joel Villanueva, Senator Angara, everybody in the hall, Mr. President, we truly believe this is a good measure. According to our minority floor leader, everybody in the hall. I so move, I so request, Mr. President.
All right, there is no objection, so recorded.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to study the measure further, I move to suspend consideration of the measure.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure suspended.
Okay, Mr. President, because of the orders of our distinguished Senator, Chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture, I move, with the permission of the body, to transfer from the calendar of ordinary business to special order, Senate Bill number 1318 under Committee Report number 35. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 1318.
Hearing no objection, consideration is in order.
We ask the Senate Secretary to read the title of
The
the
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act amending Republic Act number 10068 or the Organic Agriculture Act of 2010.
We
Majority Leader.
recognize, Mr. President, the chairman of the committee, the distinguished lady senator, Senator Cynthia Villar.
Chairman of the chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture, distinguished lady from Las Piñas, is recognized. Senator Villar.
Mr. President, my esteemed colleagues, a pleasant good afternoon to all. Mr. President, as the chairperson in the Committee on Agriculture, Food, and Agrarian Reform, I stand here today to sponsor Senate Bill 13818 under Committee Report number 35, or an act amending Republic Act number 10068 or the Organic Agriculture Act of 2010. This bill is in substitution of Senate Bill numbers 34, 146, 648, and 773 with Senators Kiko Pangilinan, Cynthia A. Villar, Ramon Bong Revilla Jr., and Grace L. Poe as authors thereof. Senate Bill number 1318 aims to strengthen sustainable agriculture and enhance support for small organic farmers by creating a participatory guarantee system, or PGS. The PGS is a locally focused quality assurance system which is developed and practiced by people actually engaged in organic agriculture. It is built on a foundation of trust, social network, and knowledge exchange. It is used to certify producers and farmers as actual and active practitioners of organic agriculture. Under this system, a PGS group will be created which should have at least 5 members composed of farmers from a combination of both the crops and livestock sectors. In the PGS, there will be created organization levels which are the following: core PGS group, the municipality city PGS, and the provincial and national PGS. Each level will have a definite membership requirements and corresponding duties and responsibilities. All in all, they will have a goal to promote organic agriculture in our society. Another important consideration in the bill is also the system of certification and the creation of an organic certifying body. In the PGS, the following may issue a certification: a core PGS group accredited as an organic certifying body, any accredited organic certifying body who are private group, organization, or the national organization of LGUs. Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standard. The bill also seeks to amend the composition of the National Organic Agriculture Board in order to include representations from a PGS group who are actually engaged in organic agriculture, as well as the representative of small organic farmers, to ensure representations from the crops and livestock sector. The bill also mandates the Bureau of Agriculture and Fisheries Standard of the Department of Agriculture as the government agency to perform as the technical and administrative secretariat of the National Organic Agriculture Board. In summary, the bill seeks to propose amendments to address the challenges faced in promoting organic agriculture in our country at the farm and institutional levels. The ultimate goal is to help the small organic farmers attain the organic certification that is needed in order to compete in local and global markets by providing a complementary and low-cost system of quality assurance with heavy emphasis on social control and knowledge building. This will also encourage poor and small farmers to adopt organic agriculture standards and methods to the benefit of everyone. In the view of the foregoing, it is hereby recommended that the attached bill, Senate Bill 1318, prepared by the committee, entitled An Act Amending Republic Act Number 10068, or the Organic Agriculture Act of 2010, be approved in substitution of Senate Bills number 34, 146, 648, and 733, with Senators Pangilinan, Villar, Revilla Jr., and Grace Poe as authors thereof. Thank you very much.
Majority Leader,
Thank you, Mr.
Senator Pangilinan is seeking the floor. Senator Francis Pangilinan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a manifestation that we would like to submit a co-sponsorship speech of this measure, Mr. President,
All right.
for the record. Thank you, Mr.
All right.
President.
Thank you. So recorded.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, also for the record, I just want to say that the original Organic Agriculture Act was authored by myself and sponsored by myself in the last 14th Congress. So it would be good that during the period of interpellation, we could ask the sponsor on how this could improve the implementation of a law that was passed maybe about less than 10 years ago. 2010, yeah, so 10 years ago. So how it can add to or strengthen the organic agriculture industry of the Philippines. So with that, Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to study this measure further, I move that we suspend consideration of the same.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is suspended.
Mr. President, with the indulgence of our colleagues, let us go back to the agenda on amendments of measures, particularly Senate Bill number 1083. So meron na po tayong may pasa na wala kamatayan tong Anti-terrorism Act na bamboo wala pa wala na. Give up muna today. Bukas na po ang bamboo. So with that, Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1083. So move, Mr. President.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, consideration is in order.
Mr. President, we are in the period of individual amendments. May we recognize the distinguished sponsor, Senator Panfilo Lacson. And to amend, we have Senator Kiko Pangilinan, after which Senator Franklin Dillon. Wala si Coco.
The gentleman from Cavite, Senator Pampilo Lacson, Chairman of the Committee on National Defense, is recognized. And to introduce, the parliamentary status is that we are still in the period of individual amendments. We recognize Senator Francis Pangilinan, the gentleman from Pampanga, for the period of amendments.
Thank you.
We are using the approved amendments copy as of February 12, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as we manifested during the period of interpellation that we would agree to the termination of the period of interpellation, provided that we be allowed, if so warranted, some clarificatory questions during the period of amendments, Mr. President. And so we proceed with that in mind. Mr. President, we have a proposed amendment on Section 3, page 3, lines 6 to 8. Item C, on the definition of extraordinary rendition. Mr. President, we would like to introduce this amendment, replace the definition for extraordinary rendition as follows. Letter C, extraordinary rendition shall refer to the transfer of a person or suspected of being a terrorist or supporter of a terrorist organization, association, or group of persons to a foreign nation for imprisonment and interrogation on behalf of the transferring nation, period. The extraordinary rendition may be done without framing any formal charges, trial, or approval of the court. Mr. President, the above definition is used in the United States, and that the definition in the substitute bill, as I understand, was copied verbatim from an article entitled 20 Extraordinary Facts About CIA Extraordinary Rendition and the Secret Detention, Mr. President.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. For Section 46 of the bill, found on page 29.
29. Yes.
The provision, and would be some clarificatory questions, Mr. President.
It's already found on Section 47, Your Honor. No longer in Section 46.
Yeah, as of the February 12 version.
Yes.
Section 47, page 29.
47, page 29.
Yep.
Page 29, Section 47.
Line 4.
Oh, yes. But this is Section 40, ban on extraordinary rendition, Mr.
Yes.
President. Yes. The provision provides the following. This is not yet the amendment. No person suspected or convicted of the crime of terrorism shall be subjected to extraordinary rendition to any country unless his or her testimony is needed for terrorist-related police investigations or judicial trials in the said country, and unless his or her human rights, including the right against torture and the right to counsel, are officially assured by the requesting country and transmitted accordingly and approved by the Department of Justice. That line, Mr. President, or at least the original provisions of the Human Security Act, there have been well, it was deleted. May we know why these exceptions were deleted?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, based on the interpellation of Senator Pimentel, we decided to delete the phrase unless reasonably disowned or denounced by the complainants, decisions or judgment in the said cases shall preclude the filing of other cases based on the same cause or causes of action as those that were filed with the grievance committee or its branches, Mr. President. So absolutely prohibited na po ito.
So there are no longer any exceptions.
No longer.
Yes, Mr. President, we also note that the absolute ban also applies to foreign terrorists, as defined in Section 11 of the bill. May we clarify why foreign terrorists likewise cannot be extraordinarily rendered under the
Under the same
proposed
principle, Mr. President. Same reason that we have stated on the prohibition.
Thank you, Mr. President. We now proceed to Section 4, Terrorist Acts. Just for clarity, Mr. President, on page 5, line 15, after the words private property, add the following: likely to endanger human life or result in major economic loss.
Add the phrase, Mr. President.
Yes, add the phrase.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished sponsor. On the same section, line 19, release, letter D, release of dangerous substances or causing fire, floods, or explosions. After the words floods or
May I request
explosions.
for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President? I will just confer with Senator Villanueva because that was proposed to be deleted by Senator Villanueva. So I would just like, since he did not object, but nevertheless, I'd like to ask his comment on the matter, Mr. President.
Are you pertaining to line 19? Line
Line 15, Mr. President.
Line 15. Which one? After the one that was accepted? The line that was accepted?
The line that was accepted is for the,
After the word property.
Oh.
yes. Just a minute.
All right, 1 minute suspension.
Ni-restate lang yung delete mo. Kaya nga sila mag-uusap.
It's already there anyway. It's just clarifying it. Kasi ayan, undermine public safety. Create public.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Video niya na lang.
Mr. President, after clarifying the matter with Senator Villanueva and the sponsor, we would like to withdraw. our previous proposal to amend.
And it's because,
Section 4, line
After-
15.
after the
In
word
other words,
property.
we leave it as is. So we withdraw the proposed amendment, although we've approved it already.
Yeah, we've approved it already. Would like to entertain a motion to reconsider.
We move to reconsider, Mr.
then
Motion to reconsider. Any objection? Hearing none. The amendment is reconsidered. Line 15, after the word private property. What
Yes.
is the pleasure now of the gentleman on the floor?
Mr. President, we keep it as is.
So withdraw the proposed amendment.
That is correct, Mr. President.
All right, thank you. We can proceed.
And we will do the same for, although we have not acted on it, Mr. President, we will not, we will no longer proceed with our proposed amendment on Section 4, line 19. We now proceed to Section 15, accessory, page 9, lines 22 to 23 until page 10, lines 1 and 2. The last paragraph of this section removes the exemption of family members from being accessories, which exemption was in Section 6 of the Human Security Act and in Article 20 of the Revised Penal Code. The deleted paragraph reads, "Notwithstanding the above paragraph, the penalties prescribed for accessories shall not be imposed upon those who are such with respect to their spouses, ascendants, descendants, legitimate, natural, and adopted brothers and sisters, or relatives by affinity within the same degree, with the single exception of accessories falling within the provision of subparagraph A." Mr. President, this exemption was introduced by former Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago due to her concern about the breadth of certain elements of the offense of being an accessory because it could lead to criminalizing neutral acts of family members, such as supplying food to a person suspected of being a terrorist. May we know the reason for the deleting of the said exemption, Mr.
Yeah,
President?
Mr. President, we give due consideration to the gravity. The nature of the offense is so grave that it may cause loss of life and property, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we would like actually to reinstate the exemption, and that is why we would propose an amendment on page 9A, line 24, after the word shall, delete the word not.
What the line?
On page 9A, line 24, after the word shall, delete the word not.
I-govern exemption yun.
What does the sponsor
You're,
say?
you're just proposing to delete lines 22, 23?
No,
No, what,
he is proposing to delete the word not on line 24.
so it will read the exemption, lines 22 to 24, the exemption provided
And
for
9A
under Article 20 of shall
shall be applicable.
be applicable.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. The same amendment is contained in the proposal of the Senate Minority Leader. And we discussed this even informally, that since this is a special case, Mr. President, it's a crime against humanity. So I regret to reject the proposed amendment of the proponent, Mr. President.
May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Wala tayong boboto.
Sa dati.
Wala. Kung magpapaboto ka, babel tayo.
No, no, no. Pero qualified naman daw siya eh. From the previous. Ayan, no?
Session is resumed.
Ready to resume? Yes.
Yes,
Mr.
Senator
President.
Pangilinan is again recognized.
Yes, Mr. President, after conferring with our minority leader and the sponsor of the measure and the Senate President, Mr. President, just for the record, we would like to ensure that there is a qualification to this exemption, Mr. President, and it falls under.
The first paragraph, Mr.
Yes,
President.
maybe the good sponsor can just manifest
Yeah.
that, Mr. President.
It is so stated on page 9, lines 12, or line 16 to
Letter A.
Letter A.
Letter A, by profiting himself or assisting the offender to profit by the effects of the crime. B, by concealing or destroying the body of the crime or the effects or instruments thereof in order to prevent its discovery. Or C, by harboring, concealing, or assisting in the escape of the principal or conspirator of the crime, etc., etc.
So what you're saying is that it's encompassing the concern of the gentleman and Senator Miriam before.
It is not absolute, Mr.
Yes,
President.
all right, thank you.
Yes, with that, Mr. President, we will withdraw our proposed amendment.
All right, thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on Section 18, on page 11, judicial authorization requisites. One of the requirements for the issuance of a judicial authorization for surveillance of suspects and interception and recording of communications provided in item C of Section 8 of the Human Security Act was deleted. The requirement is that, which was it's now being proposed to be deleted, there is no other effective means readily available for acquiring such evidence. May we know for the record the reason why this requirement was deleted?
The requirement for, there is no other evidence, Mr. President. Anyway, it will be covered by the determination of probable cause to be done by the judge, the issuing authority of the judicial authorization, Mr. President.
Yes,
So
Mr.
we leave it up to the judge to whom the application for judicial authorization is filed to determine probable cause, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
In this case, right to be informed of the acts done by the law enforcement.
Kaya mo na yun. Basta judge na bahala.
Wala naman siya proposed amendment. Oo nga, dinelete niya. Tapos nag-manifest siya. We're not proposing that it be this. Okay. Wala. Yes, pero sinabi nga niya that it's the judge who will determine probably. Yeah, yeah. Sige. Pero, okay. Sige na, okay. Pero ito.
Sabihin natin, yung judge naman ang determine ng probable cause. Tama na yun.
Ano yung effect mo sa surveillance?
Pero atin lang yun.
Has the right to be informed of the acts done by the law. Kapag kinasuhan na.
Sino? Si?
Pag kami kaso na.
Bakit?
Yeah. Okay.
Hindi nila nun.
So what happens here is, at what point will you be allowed Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Yes, Mr. President, Section 19.
Classification and contents.
Yes, classification and contents of the order of the court. On page 11, line 24. Mr. President, after the word information, we would like to propose the insertion of the following provisions, or proviso, Mr. President. And I quote, provided that the person being surveilled or whose communications, messages, conversations, discussions, or spoken or written words and effects have been monitored, listened to, bugged, or recorded by law enforcement authorities, has the right to be informed of the acts done by the law enforcement authorities in the premises, or to challenge, if she or he intends to do so, the legality of the interference before the Court of Appeals which issued the written order. Mr. President, this provision was included in Section 9 of the Human Security Act, and according to former Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, there must be sufficient safeguards for such abuse. The person affected by such surveillance should have an effective remedy against the interference into his or her rights, should it be established, Mr. President. This is in accordance with Article 2, Paragraph 3 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which reads, and I quote, each state party to the present covenant undertakes, number 3, letter A, to ensure that any person whose rights or freedoms are herein recognized are violated shall have an effective remedy, notwithstanding that the violation has been committed by persons acting in an official capacity. And B, to ensure that any person claiming such remedy shall have his right thereto determined by competent judicial, administrative, or legislative authorities, or by any other competent authority provided for by the legal system of the state, and to develop the possibilities of judicial remedy. And letter C, to ensure the competent authority shall enforce such remedies when granted. Our concern here, Mr. President, with the deletion of that proviso, that and that a case has been filed against an accused, the accused should be able to determine or at least get information regarding the surveillance or the evidence that was secured and the legality of the said intervention or interference, Mr. President.
Mr. President, it will defeat the very purpose of surveillance. I came from law enforcement. If you inform the person that you're surveilling, then you have effectively warned him. So he'll be very careful in revealing information. So to me, Mr. President, it will defeat the very purpose of surveillance. So I'm sorry I cannot accept the proposed amendment. Anyway, the person surveilled will be informed after the lapse of the 60 plus 30 days 60-day period of judicial authorization issued by the court. So it's
yes.
the proper time when the subject of surveillance will be informed. It is so stated in the succeeding, in the other provisions of this measure, Mr. President. But to inform him that he is being surveilled,
No, that's not
it is as good as not having the weapon or the means to surveil that person, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, my understanding is that the information that is to be made available to the accused would be after.
After.
Not before.
Not during.
Not during and not before. It is after, precisely because he already stands accused. The information that was gathered because of surveillance. And so he, being an accused person, should be entitled to the information that was obtained, the manner in which it was obtained after, Mr. President, not before the fact, Mr. President. It is also a safeguard, Mr. President, and that law enforcers who are actually implementing the surveillance are aware that if they cut corners, then they will have to, after the filing of the information, and this is questioned by the accused, they will have to present the results of their surveillance, the process by which it was undertaken, so that it is consistent precisely with the provisions of this law, Mr. President.
If the information will be done after,
Yes, Mr. President.
then as also proposed by Senator Dillon, it's included in his amendments, then I will accept that, Mr. President. We'll just talk about the period
Yes.
after which the judicial authorization shall have expired.
With that understanding, Mr. President, and at least subject to style and perhaps review of Senator Drilon,
The proposal of Senator Dillon is to allot a period of 30 days after the lapse of the extended period of 30 days. So within the 30-day period, then the person or when no case has been filed, then the person will be informed.
yeah. So,
And
yeah.
I'm inclined to accept the amendment of Senator Drilon in that regard, Mr. President.
Yes, this is precisely the old law. Yes. So with that understanding, subject to style, my understanding
Yes,
is
I
the good
accept,
sponsor
Mr.
will
President.
accept the proposed amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. We can now proceed to the next item. Section 20, effective period of judicial authorization. That would be on page 12, line 15. We note that the 30-day validity of the judicial authorization in the Human Security Act was extended to 60 days and extendable to another 30 days. Thus, it is 90 days. May we know the reason for the extension, Mr. President? Just to
We
clarify.
propose to extend the period to 60 days, Mr. President, based on our extensive discussion with law enforcement agencies present during the committee hearings. And they said that that's the reasonable period wherein they can gather information or even evidence, for that matter, Mr. President. So that's the reason why we extended the 30-day period to 60 days.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended. Correct. Yun ang sinasabi nila.
Actually. Yun nga i-argue mo na
So why do we want them to be notified? I mean, we wanted to say this. So after they've examined and they found nothing, that was a previous law. Yes. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on the same section, section 19, on page 12, line 32.
that's section 20, Mr. President.
The new
yes,
section
yes,
20.
the new section 20. Line 22. Mr. President, there was a paragraph that was deleted requiring notice to be given to persons subject of examination and freezing of accounts and imposing a penalty for non-compliance therewith, Mr. President. Mr. President, the paragraph to be inserted reads as follows. In other words, we want the deleted provision to be reinstated. If no case is filed within the 60-day period, the applicant, police, or law enforcement official shall immediately notify in writing the person subject of the bank examination and freezing of bank deposits, placements, trusts, and accounts, assets, and records. Mr. President, the reason why we'd like this reinstated is because we're concerned, Mr. President, that the law enforcement agency has been able to, policemen have been able to examine the accounts, etc., found nothing, and then the person being investigated has no knowledge that his accounts were examined, and there were no cases filed. We would like to think that for his peace of mind, Mr. President, he should at least be informed, and the law enforcers who did the surveillance will be put on notice that if there is nothing found, that they will still have to make that report and provide that information. And failure to do so would amount to a penalty, Mr. President. My fear, Mr. President, is without this notice to the person being investigated, it could be abused, or the looking at or going through these accounts and the information obtained could be a source of abuse, Mr. President.
Section 20 deals only with judicial authorization to conduct surveillance, Mr. President. What you just mentioned is in another section, I think section 37, Mr. President, on page 22. Section 20 only deals with judicial authorization to conduct surveillance, Mr. President. It does not mention or make mention freezing.
May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
In the old law,
Nasa 30.
yung authorization to go into the account. Sa ibang section 37?
Ex-parte nga ito, di ba?
Accounts. Diba? Bank examination, placement. Diba? Yeah, but he's saying this is for judicial authorization. We'll just go back to it, okay? We'll go to the next one. so section 21. So this is just style. On section and all. Okay. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the sponsor, we would like to table this proposed amendment, proceed to the next. We are trying to reconcile, Mr. President, the proposal, the proposed amendment, and where we can put it in the substitute bill. So with the permission of the sponsor, we can proceed to the next item.
Okay, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Section 21, custody of intercepted and recorded communications. On page 13, lines 8 and 10,
Custody.
8 to 10. Delete the last sentence for being redundant, which reads, the joint affidavit shall provide the chain of custody or the list of persons which exercise possession or custody over the tapes, discs, and recordings. Mr. President, this is already indicated in section 22C, contents of the joint affidavit on page 13, lines 23 and 24, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
Tama po.
Yeah, redundant nga. It is restated under section 22. That's what you're saying, Mr. President?
23 and page 13, lines 23 and 24.
The chain of custody or the list of persons.
Yes. It was just repeated, Mr. President.
The joint affidavit of law, of course,
Yeah,
shall state.
okay. Accepted, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the
All
same
right,
section.
Any objection? Adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the same section, section 21, 22 in the new, the substituted measure, reinstate the following paragraph after line 10, Mr. President.
Line 10?
Line, after line...
10
sorry.
is on section 21, Mr. President, of the substitute.
Yes, yes. Sorry, yes. Section 21.
The new section 21.
Yes, that is
The
correct.
new.
In case of death of the applicant or in case he is physically disabled to execute the required affidavit, the one next in rank to the applicant among the members of the team named in the written order of the authorizing division of the Court of Appeal shall execute with the members of the team that required affidavit.
It's in the old law, Mr. President. Accepted, Mr. President.
Yes.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Section 22, contents of joint affidavit.
All right.
On page 13, line 27, after the word summaries, add or. Then after the word excerpts, delete the phrase, and all copies thereof, and that no duplicates or copies thereof. Again, it is redundant, Mr. President, as it is already mentioned in line 25.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Section 25, unauthorized or malicious interceptions and or recordings. After the word years, this is on page 15, line 8. Page 15.
After years,
Yes. Add another paragraph. This was deleted from Section 16 of the Human Security Act with a few revisions, Mr. President, which reads as follows. In addition to the liability attaching to the offender for the commission of any other offense, the penalty of 10 years and 1 day to 12 years of imprisonment and the accessory penalty of perpetual absolute disqualification from public office shall be imposed upon any law enforcement agent or military personnel who maliciously obtain an authority from the Court of Appeals to track down, tap, listen to, intercept, and record in whatever manner or form any communication, message, conversation, discussion, or spoken or written words of a person charged with or suspected of the crime of terrorism or conspiracy to commit terrorism, provided that notwithstanding Section 23 of this Act, the party aggrieved By such authorization shall be allowed access to the sealed envelope or sealed package and the contents thereof as evidence for the prosecution of any police or law enforcement personnel who maliciously procured said authorization.
May I invite your attention to Section 16, Mr. President. This is a standby provision, penalty for public official. If the offender found guilty of any of the acts defined and penalized under the provisions of this act, is a public official or employee, she shall be charged with the administrative offense of grave misconduct and/or disloyalty to the Republic of the Philippines. And on the next page, and be meted with the penalty of dismissal from the service, with the accessory penalties of cancellation of civil service eligibility for future retirement benefits, and perpetual absolute disqualification from running for any elective office or holding any public office, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President.
There's a separate section.
But my understanding with that separate section on 9A, Mr. President, is that it is for administrative liability, Mr. President.
Which involves perpetual absolute disqualification.
Yes, Mr.
In
President.
addition to the penalty.
That is right, Mr. President, but we would like to also emphasize the criminal liability of such, perhaps, Mr. President, again, subject to style, if we can
But
include.
it's already stated in Section 25, Mr. President, imprisonment of 10 years and 1 day to 12 years. That's the criminal liability. And then there's a standby clause, standby section for penalty for public official. So all violations will be covered and penalized administratively.
May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah.
I think meron na tayong provision for that. Ha? Adi, paano natin? Subject to style, we will accept your ready to resume, Mr. President.
Yes.
Session resumed.
Yes, Mr. President, I understand that subject to style, the good sponsor is willing to accept the proposed amendment on the criminal liability of malicious, maliciously procured information, Mr. President, that it be included, the information, all information that have been maliciously procured should be made available to the aggrieved parties.
I will accept, Mr. President, subject to style.
Thank you, Mr.
Subject to
President.
style. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished sponsor.
Kasi alam ko meron yun. Nandiyan pa kasi doon na na-carry natin.
On the same,
Anyway, check naman natin.
Section 30, Mr. President, detention without judicial warrant. I understand from conversations with Senator Ontiveros, we were proposing that it be retained to the 3-day period, but I understand that the sponsor will not be willing to accept this, so we will no longer propose it, Mr. President. But this may affect, Mr. President, the final vote of this representation. But just to get the process going, Mr. President, we will proceed to the next item. On the same section, may we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
In 3 days. Oh, sige, hindi na rin. Hindi na rin. Ito, wala na to. So hindi na kayo, ano to? Hindi na rin yung ano yun, di ba? No, we raised this, di ba? Yeah, but if they... Yeah. Okay. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. On Section 30, this was a subject that we raised during the interpellation, Mr. President. Page 17, line 20.
After taking consideration.
Reinstate the following deleted paragraphs. The police or law enforcement personnel concerned shall, before detaining the person suspected of the crime of terrorism, present him or her before any judge at the latter's residence or office nearest the place where the arrest took place at any time of day or night. Mr. President, I raised this, but I was, well, the position of the sponsor, Mr. President, during the interpellation was that that anyway he would be, if I'm not mistaken, that he would be presented to a judge at some point, Mr. President, but not immediately.
Line 20 says immediately.
We are concerned with the safety of the judge, Mr. President. We discussed this during the committee hearings, and the person may not be brought before the judge, and the judge may just be informed in writing that such person is under the custody of law enforcement officers, Mr. President.
Yes. Well, Mr. President, with that clarification, and I understand, as earlier manifested by the good sponsor, that he's not inclined, we will not pursue this.
As an added safeguard, we included the Commission on Human Rights.
That is correct,
And then,
Mr. President.
meron pa pong visitorial rights yung arrested person.
Yes. Our concern then was that because of the length of time that he is to be placed in detention without any charges, Mr. President, that perhaps the physical presentation to the judge would be another safeguard. But that is for the record, Mr. President. We can, we will not pursue this proposed amendment, Mr. President. We will proceed to the next item. It's the same, no? So, may we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Ito. Hindi na rin niya tatanggapin. Sige na. Ano pa? Hindi na niya isama yan. So hindi na rin.
Andiyan pa nga sa 31, and daming safeguards, oh. Be informed of the nature and cause. Remain silent. To have competent independent counsel. Andiyan lahat, eh.
Saan ba yung... Well, okay naman yun kasi hindi naman pwedeng walang restriction. Kasi nga... Saan ba yun? Saan ba yun? And what line is this? Section 33. for the record. Yes, Mr. President, ready to resume.
Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Just to assuage the apprehension of the distinguished gentleman, Mr. President, may I invite his attention to Section 31, Rights of a Person Under Custodial Detention. All the safeguards are listed here, Mr. President: the right to be informed of the nature and cause of his arrest, to remain silent, to have his competent and independent counsel, and so forth and so on,
Yes.
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, we now proceed to Section 33, requirement for an official custodial logbook and its contents. This has been, well, the committee report deleted this, but it is now
We have-
back.
Yeah,
And,
because of your intervention, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. Just to clarify, and so that it is clear in terms of our records, there is, however, an additional proviso, apart from retaining the previous provision in the old law. This is a new provision, a new phrase: without any form of or restriction, was replaced by subject to reasonable restrictions.
What
by the
line is that,
custodian.
Mr. President?
Uh,
Under Section 33,
Lines 12 and 13.
12 and 13.
So, her physician at any time of day or night, the original laws, or the law as it stands, is without any form of restriction. But now it says, subject to reasonable restrictions by the custodial facility. Just for the record, Mr. President, what would constitute reasonable restrictions? We have no, we agree, this is a terrorist, accused terrorist individual. Security must be top of mind and must always be in place. Just for the record, so that it is clear as to the intent, what would constitute reasonable restrictions?
Just like any other detention facility, Mr. President, there are rules to be followed, like the number of persons allowed each time, the time of visit. That doesn't include lawyers, Mr. President, and so forth and so on. So that would be reasonable.
Yes.
On the part of the detention, on the part of the wardens, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you for that clarification, Mr. President. But the intent precisely is to retain the official custodial logbook and its contents, which we are thankful that this has been accommodated, Mr. President. On Section 21, Mr. President, sorry, Section 34, rather.
24.
34.
34.
No torture or coercion in investigation and interrogation, Mr. President. On page 20, line 15. After the phrase "is absolutely prohibited," can we add the following sentence or phrase: "and shall be penalized under said law"?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, accepted.
Thank you, Mr.
Adopted.
President. Section 39, on page 23, line 18.
39. Page 23, yeah.
Section 39,
Line 18.
line 19.
19.
After the word, sorry, line 18, page 23, line 18. After the word "who," insert the phrase, "after being duly served with a written order of authorization from the Court of Appeals," Mr. President, refuses to allow the examination of the deposits. Just to, for purposes of clarity, Mr. President, that there has to be the written order of authorization.
Kindly restate the proposed amendment, Mr. President. After the word "who,"
Yes.
you insert the phrase,
Who, after being duly served with the written order of authorization from the Court of Appeals, refuses to allow the examination of deposits, placements, trusts, and so forth and so on.
matter of course na ito.
While it's in the title,
It is-
defying a court authorization, we just want to make it clear that they have received the court authorization and that they have defied it, Mr. President. After being duly served.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Sa editorial amendment, a comma before refuses. All right, accepted, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished sponsor, on the same section. May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
So what are we? Yeah. Ano pa? Ano, what is it now? Where is it? Pinababa? No, pinababa. So you want it back? Yeah. Section 41. Diba probationable to? Probationable lang 6 years.
Minsan naman kasi, sorry,
Diba?
for emphasis eh. Pwede rin lang i-restate mo para lang emphasize. Yun ang point. Medyo mo.
Oh, diba? Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session resumed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. On section 40, 41, section 41 in the substituted bill, page 23, penalty for unauthorized revelation of classified materials. Mr. President, the previous measure, the existing law punishes the unauthorized revelation of classified materials by imprisonment of 10 years and 1 day to 12 years. This was the previous law. Now we've reduced it, based on the proposal, to a penalty of 6 months to 6 years and 1 day to 6 years. This is a huge reduction, Mr. President, of penalties. May we know why we are reducing the penalties for what I believe to be a serious breach, Mr. President, unauthorized revelation of classified materials.
One minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
10 to 12 years. 10 to 12. Yeah. So retain. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, after conferring with the sponsor and the minority leader, I am made to understand that the sponsor is willing to accept that we retain the 10 years and 1 day to 12 years as a penalty for unauthorized revelation of classified materials. 12 years.
So that is your proposal.
With the permission of
Yes, the minority
Senator
leader.
Pangilinan and Senator Lacson, I'm sorry, yes. We propose, Mr. President, that first there should be no reins.
Okay.
Because the reins under the revised penal code would depend on the mitigating, aggravating circumstances, which we do not have in a special law. Number two, when we reviewed the whole penalty, we found so many penalties, so many ranges, it becomes very difficult to figure out what is the penalty. So we said the most serious is life imprisonment. The next most serious is I think 20 years down the line. May we suggest that whatever is the penalty, first we should no longer have a range, just one penalty. That's all.
Yes.
We have no particular opinion on how long it should be, so long as it is not a range. And number two, we should keep it to a level so that we can immediately classify which ones would be subjected to life imprisonment and lesser penalties.
That's very well understood, Mr. President.
With that manifestation, then will the good sponsor be willing to just peg it at 10 years, Mr. President?
I'm willing, Mr. President.
10
no
years.
problem.
So move, Mr. President. Subject to style.
Penalty of imprisonment of 10 years shall be imposed upon blah blah, etc., etc.
Yes,
Any objection? Adopted.
Gagawin na natin lahat. 10 years yung under life na yan. Sa life. Mitigating.
Okay. May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Hindi, okay lang.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we just have a clarificatory, well, we would like to clarify matters regarding the role of the Commission on Human Rights. On page 29, Mr. President, after section 46, role of the Commission on Human Rights, my understanding, Mr. President, is that this was put as a new provision
Nasaan yun?
and replaced,
What page is that?
sorry, page 28,
Roll.
line 27.
Wala ko sa lumang bata. Pero yung roll of bakit sila meron sa prosecution? Walang prosecutorial power.
During the period of interpellation, Mr. President, there was a discussion on the abolition or the deletion of Section 47 of the law, creation of a grievance committee. The proposed bill, Mr. President, the existing law has a grievance committee composed of the Ombudsman as chair and Solgen, Undersecretary from the DOJ as members. And this is to evaluate complaints against actuations of the police. The proposed measure, Mr. President, has deleted this. And my understanding is that during the period of interpellations, the justification, or at least the explanation, was that while we are deleting or we are removing a grievance committee, the Commission on Human Rights will still play a role, Mr. President. Is that right, Mr. President?
That is correct, Mr. President.
Yes. Our concern, Mr. President, is that the grievance committee, obviously, under the existing law, has the Ombudsman, has the Solicitor General, and the Undersecretary of the DOJ as members. They have powers to prosecute, Mr. President. The CHR does not. And that is our concern, Mr. President. If we are to hold our law enforcers to account, should there be abuses, Mr. President, you would like to have an entity with powers to prosecute, Mr. President, so that there is teeth, Mr. President. It is also precisely an added safeguard. The Commission on Human Rights does not have prosecutorial powers.
Before the sponsor answers, may we know how long the Human Security Act has been enforced?
2007, since 2007, Mr. President.
So that's 13 years.
13 years.
Has there been any case?
One.
There's only one conviction, Mr. President.
Only one conviction.
RTC 11 in Taguig, Mr. President.
And what was the role of the CHR? Nothing.
The judge who convicted is no longer here, Mr. President. I was about to ask him. But I don't think the CHR
No,
played a role.
the conviction was because he pleaded guilty.
That is not accurate, Mr. President.
That is what I was just given as an information now. Nag-plead daw ng guilty.
I think the case that you're referring to, Mr. President, is a DOJ case for plea bargaining, where the respondent opted for a plea bargaining, Mr. President.
Well, it could be, but anyway, the point is that I think
Yes, Mr.
we should be very careful in this particular section. Again, lest what happened in the last 13 years happens again. Takot na takot yung mga enforcers.
Yes. Mr. President, just to clarify, Section 46 now provides
Sa DOJ.
that the CIHR shall have concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute. If that is the case, Mr. President, then we are willing to agree with the abolition of or deletion of the grievance committee.
Former,
Just so that it's placed on record. We are now giving the CHR the power to prosecute, which it does not have at the moment.
correct.
Although concurrent jurisdiction.
Yes, it's very clear here in Section
Yes.
46.
So we can,
Might as well retain it as is.
yes, Mr. President, we are no longer pursuing the.
All right.
We
can-
simply adopted Section 55 of 9372, Mr. President.
All right. So we
Okay.
can proceed.
With that clarification, Mr. President, and that now the CHR precisely will have concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute public officials, law enforcement agencies, agents, Mr. President, law enforcers. We will now proceed. We will no longer pursue the retention of the grievance committee. Okay.
Okay. All right.
May we have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Saan nga ba yun? Section 50. So anong ginawa? Tinanggal? Tinanggal? So you want... Where is it? Where is it? So what is your proposal now? Saan? Okay, okay. Okay, but what do we hear? Okay, okay. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Yes, Mr. President, Section 50, promoting peace and inclusivity in schools, learning centers, and training institutions. On page 31, lines 8 to 15, schools, learning centers, and training institutions found by the appropriate administrative or licensing agencies to be promoting or encouraging acts of violence, extremism, and any terrorist acts punishable under this act based on substantive evidence shall have its license revoked and shall immediately cease operations. Mr. President, just to clarify that this is after notice and hearing, Mr. President.
Yes, that is correct, Mr. President.
So the immediately cease operations, Mr. President, and revocation is after notice and hearing.
That is correct. We follow due process.
Yes. So perhaps we should do this, a proposed amendment. After the phrase cease operations, insert the phrase after notice and hearing.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Due notice and hearing.
Yes, Mr. President, we raised this during the interpellations. My understanding now is that applicability of the revised penal code, the provisions of Book 1 of the revised penal code shall be applicable to this act. That was Section 52. Now the new Section 53, on the other hand, will now provide that RPC not inconsistent with the provisions of this act shall have supplementary application. So it's no longer a absolute application, Mr. President.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Hindi na, bayaan niya na lang. Total i-delete. Hindi naman siya mag-go. Anong reason niya? Ba't ko pinalis ni Frank? Ano? Yung trial of persons charged. Yan.
So, ano to? Hindi, doon na lang kay... Mr. President, we have no other... ready to resume.
Session resumed.
Yes, we have no other proposed amendments, Mr. President. We would like to end our amendment process, Mr. President. We'd like to thank the good sponsor for his accommodating a number of our proposed amendments. And we will now turn over to our minority leader for his proposed amendments. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished sponsor.
Likewise,
All right,
Mr. President.
Majority Leader, is there any other Minority Leader?
I believe the minority leader.
Are you
Mr. President.
amending? Yes. The Minority Leader, Senator Frank Drilon is recognized.
Mr. President, as the good sponsor will confirm, we've been sitting down with his staff on the proposed amendments. I think we're doing it, we've come to a number of agreements. There were amendments presented and accepted this afternoon. We would request that a clean copy be made. And
Okay.
it will be on that basis that we'll review, and I am certain that we can finish our amendments in one session, Mr. President.
All right.
With that assurance, Mr. President, I agree.
All right. We hereby direct the Secretariat to produce another or a new clean copy. That will be as of February, what is today? 18, February 18, 2020. So ordered. Majority Leader?
Yes, Mr. President, with that, we suspend consideration of the measure so that we can be provided with the clean copies, Mr. President, of the amendments.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, the consideration of the measure is suspended.
Yes, Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move that Senate Bill, just a referral, Mr. President, change referral. I move that the Senate Bill number 405, or the Katutubong Tagapagtanggol Act, be transferred from the Committee on National Defense to the Committee on Public Order as primary committee. I so move, Mr. President.
All right. Hearing no objection, so transferred.
Yes, and just to take note, Mr. President, that the National Defense Committee will remain secondary committee, as similar bills has also been heard by the Committee on Public Order.
All right. So recorded.
Ano yung sa inyo? Are you a sponsor? Yeah. After you, Joanne.
Let me have a few minutes of suspension.
Kasi break natin, umabot na. Tapos ako palibak sa'yo. Tuloy na natin. Para tuloy tayo. Ay, tomorrow. But tomorrow, that's true. Oh, sige, sige. Sige, sige. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1233 under Committee Report number 30.
Is there any objection? Motion's carried.
Mr. President, the status is we're in the period of interpellation. May we recognize Senator Joel Villanueva to sponsor the measure, and I believe it's the minority floor leader who will interpret, but may I ask for a 1-minute suspension?
Session suspended.
Pagdaan ko dyan sa likod ng isang araw, sa security, sabi ko, may tao ba dyan? May tao ba dyan? Oh.
Partially detained. Ang dami.
All right, ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session resumed.
May we recognize our distinguished minority floor leader, Senator Franklin Drilon, to interpolate Senator Joel Villanueva.
Senator Franklin Dillon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, we have been ready on our interpellation since last week, but the majority leader has always placed this bill at the bottom of the list. You know,
Mahina ho talaga ako, Mr. President. Super hina. And he is also part of this measure, is also a co-author.
Anyway, Mr. President, will gentlemen yield to just a very few clarificatory questions?
Yes, Mr. President, definitely, especially from our distinguished minority floor leader.
Mr. President, the amendment, as the way I understand it, on the legal assistance fund, the first amendment is to locate the power to hire foreign lawyers. The authority to hire foreign lawyers is lodged in the legal assistant as presently worded and as presently worded. It is proposed under the amendment under Senate Bill 1233 that the same be transferred to the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs. May we know first what is the purpose of changing the authority from the legal assistant to the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Affairs?
We were just told that currently it was actually OMWA who handled this, but let me also put on record that with the consultations made by this representation to our distinguished minority floor leader, and we agree to his recommendation that it be lodged to the head of the mission of the Philippine Embassy concerned. And we agree that it is far better, Mr. President, that we lodge it with the head of the mission of the Philippine Embassy concerned.
That's correct, Mr. President. We have proposed that in an off the floor to the sponsor because we thought that access to immediate access and to the fund should be made, and the best judge is the head of the mission of the embassy concerned, of the Philippine embassy concerned, rather than the head office in Manila.
Yes. Agree.
Because that takes a long time.
Yes.
We just have to, trust our heads of mission that they will use their best judgment in hiring lawyers and the rates, rather than wait for the authority from the Home Office through the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs, so that we have discussed this measure or this amendment with the good sponsor, and we have agreed
that instead of the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Affairs or the legal assistant, it should be the head of mission of the Philippine Embassy of the where the need to hire is needed. So that, for example, if the need is in Riyadh, the Philippine Embassy in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia should be authorized to hire the legal counsel, no longer going back to Manila and seek the authority of the Office of the Undersecretary. We had proposed that amendments, and the good sponsor has agreed. So at the appropriate time, we will propose that amendment, Mr.
Yes,
President.
Mr. President. And just to also add to what distinguished minority leader has mentioned, it is just logical, Mr. President, considering that in reality, it is actually the heads of posts to hire the legal services of foreign lawyers. So it makes a lot of sense. And we thank the distinguished minority leader for pointing this out.
The second question that we have is using the fund on paralegals. Mr. President, I am concerned that if we open the fund to the hiring of personnel, difficult to control. And our suggestion is that the hiring should be done similar to a special project, so that it is only for the purpose of the case which the migrant worker or overseas Filipinos is facing, that we hire the necessary lawyer. Let the lawyer handle the paralegal services rather than the fund or the DFA handling the hiring of the paralegal. So at the appropriate time, we will propose to delete on page 2, lines 3, starting with in addition, to line 12 with the word hired.
And or hired.
And or
Yes.
hired.
Yes. I would like to put on record, Mr. President, that this representation as the sponsor agree and totally believe that we can delete this sentence, especially since, as mentioned and pointed out by our distinguished minority floor leader, that this provision may be also subject to abuse. And we concur and submit to the wisdom of our minority floor leader.
Oh, just a question on line 12 to line 19 on page 2. It basically says that the legal assistance fund shall at all times be immediately available to all migrant workers and overseas Filipinos in distress who initiate or who is implicated in any type of case initiated in a foreign post from the time of the commencement of the complaint, action, or similar proceeding, and in all stages of the proceeding until promulgation and execution of judgment and at all levels of appeal. Can we spread into the record that the operative fact is that the Filipinos that will be benefited by this are those overseas Filipinos in distress?
Yes, Mr. President.
Because if he or she, I mean the overseas Filipinos, is not in a in distress situation, he or she should not be entitled to have access to the fund.
Yes, we agree, Mr. President.
Okay.
That is correct.
By the way, how much is the present fund, Mr. President?
For 2020, Mr. President, the total budget for this particular item, the legal assistance fund, is 201,348,053.17, Mr. President.
201 million.
Yes, Mr. President.
That's the General Appropriations Act for
Yes, Mr. President. the GA.
2020.
2020, yes.
201 million.
Yes, Mr. President.
Plus or minus. And in 2019, how much was the budget and how much was utilized?
In 2019, the total budget is 209,920,252.
And would
The utilization for 2019 is 207 million with the balance of 1.9 million na hindi po nagamit, Mr. President. So that's about 99.07%.
sa advertising lingo, tawag din sakto. In any case, Mr. President, we noticed an amendment that is being proposed on the types of cases.
Yes.
What is the current use of the fund?
Mr. President, currently, costs and services can be chargeable to a legal assistance fund with the following. First is the professional fees for service rendered by private lawyers abroad, professional fees for services rendered by domestic lawyers in the Philippines in relation to trafficking, illegal recruitments, and related cases such as criminal or police cases, labor-related disputes, and immigration or deportation cases. Another is filing fees, docket fees, court fees, notarial fees, and other charges or costs imposed by courts or tribunals, including immigration penalties, and on a case-by-case basis, fines and civil judgment. Fourth is the incidental investigation, litigation, case monitoring, and training related to these and out-of-pocket expenses. Five is bail bonds to secure temporary release of Filipinos under detention overseas. We wanted to amend that na hindi lang po bail bonds, kundi even other bonds. Number 6 is expenses necessary to secure and preserve documentary or testimonial evidence. Seventh is expenses intended for the protection of witnesses and to ensure their cooperation. And last but not the least, expenses for public information campaigns and training for paralegal conducted or sponsored by the Department of Foreign Affairs.
Is this in the present regulation, Mr. President? Is this
Yes.
enumeration?
Yes, Mr. President.
May I propose that an amendment be inserted which will which will specifically task the Department of Foreign Affairs, specifically the Office of Migrant Office of Migrant Workers?
The mission of the Philippine Embassy concerned.
The Department of Foreign Affairs
Undersecretary.
specifically be mandated
Yes.
to issue rules and regulations on the access to the funds,
We'd
rather than enumerate all those
Yes.
instances in the law.
We'd gladly accept, Mr. President, considering the
amendment.
expertise of our minority floor leader.
Yeah, we don't have to enumerate
Yes.
and be restricted by that by the enumeration mentioned, but we should insert in the law that the Department of Foreign Affairs shall issue rules and regulations on which cases the funds will be used. Is that in order, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Although I must say, Mr. President, that it was somehow indicated, if I'm not mistaken, in Section 2 of the implementing rules and regulations. But again,
okay.
in principle, I totally agree, Mr. President, with the suggestions made by the distinguished minority floor leader.
Yeah, it's here in general, but maybe just a phrase to make it with particular reference to the uses of the funds. I have no
Yes, yes.
problem with the way it is worded now. But it is very general, so that if we can just insert a phrase or two, which will indicate that the specific uses of the fund should, or that the rules that will be promulgated should indicate the specific uses of the fund, because the way it is worded now, it can include collection cases. That's why I said
Yes.
the operative fact is in distress.
Yes.
So the rules should reflect that intention to exclude purely personal cases, the maniningil ng utang,
Yes.
collection cases,
Yes.
and all that stuff. It should be only used in cases where the Filipino overseas is in
In
distress.
distress. Yes, Mr. President. Totally agree, and we thank the distinguished gentleman for pointing that out.
Again, in the period of amendment, this is just something that was inadvertently omitted on page 1,
Page 1.
line 12.
Page 1, line 12.
Yes. After the word workers, we
Oh, yeah,
should include and overseas Filipinos.
Totally agree and accepted, Mr. President. We will make necessary adjustments, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we have no more questions on interpellation, and even if ordered by the majority leader, we have no more questions.
We thank the distinguished minority floor leader for once again pointing out relevant and insightful points, and we also thank our distinguished colleagues for overwhelmingly supporting this particular Senate Bill number 1233. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the remarks of the good minority floor leader, a bit naughty.
And
but
we thank the
it's a naughty
distinguished
remark.
majority floor leader
None of
for
which are
finally
true.
calendaring, Mr. President.
None of which are true. Lest my colleagues think that we are conniving between majority and minority. Mr. President, with that, I move to close the period of interpellation as no other member wishes to interpellate. So we can proceed to the period of amendment, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
If the good gentleman from Iloilo is ready, we can propose the amendments, Mr.
I
President.
think I can.
Okay. Yeah, so
Yes.
so moved. So the period of amendments, Mr. President, is
We're
open.
ready.
Open, yes.
So we'd like to recognize both the minority leader and distinguished gentleman from
Senator Franklin
Bulacan.
Drilon is recognized.
Okay. This is individual amendments, boss. Kasi... Yes, we're ready to accept any amendments by the minority floor leader.
I think what is in order first are the committee amendments, if any.
This is a substitute measure, Mr.
Okay,
President. so
okay,
we-
see. All right.
we open the-
Mr. President, then on page 1, on lines 10
to 11.
and 11, delete the phrase bracket legal assistant on line 10 up to the word affairs on line 11, and in lieu thereof, insert the following: head of mission of the Philippine Embassy concerned.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none.
On on line 12, between the word workers and facing, insert the phrase and overseas Filipinos.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Amendments carried.
On
Page 2.
page 2, delete from lines 3, starting with the word in addition, up to line 12, and or hired. Delete up to that point.
Yes, we agree and we accept the amendment, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, amendments carried.
One minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Yung amendment on use dito natin lagay. Oo, saan? Use of the fund.
Line 6. Page 3, line 6. Okay, the word out.
Dito, after, siguro on line 4, ano, after this act, including the specific uses. Including the specific, yun na, ano? Page 3. Is for the specific use of the fund. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
On page 3, line 4, between the word "act" and insert the following phrase, comma, no, there's a comma already, including but not limited to the specific uses of the fund, comma.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, amendments carried.
That's all the amendments that we have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank
Majority
the
floor.
distinguished minority leader for introducing meaningful amendments.
With that, Mr. President, no other member signified to give their amendments. We move to close the period of amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Thank you. I don't understand. Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading. He cannot anymore claim that I am not prioritizing his measure, Mr. President, because I went all the way to second reading. Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 1334. Sorry, that's the wrong bill. Adolescent pregnancy ata yun. Sana ba yan ito?
Mr. President,
Sana ba yun?
1233.
1, 2, 3, 3.
Committee report number 30.
Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 3. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask for a 1-minute suspension?
Mr.
Where I'll now
President,
ask Senator.
Mr. President, may I just make a very short manifestation after approving this measure? Thank you, Mr. President. May I? Yes, thank you, Mr. President, esteemed colleagues. Please allow me to thank and congratulate all of you for approving in second reading Senate Bill number 1233 under Committee Report number 30, expanding the use of the Legal Assistance Fund. Allow me also to shorten the subject or title of this bill, which is the Legal Assistance Fund, into the acronym LEAF. Mr. President, a leaf, especially a green leaf, depicts hope. Ito po ang gusto nating maramdaman at maranasan ng ating mga kababayang OFWs in distress. Sila na humaharap sa mga kaso, nasa piitan, o nagsampa ng mga reklamo laban sa kanilang mga amo o employer abroad, na may pag-asa po sila na pwedeng magbago ang sitwasyon nila dahil sa ang bansang Pilipinas, ang gobyerno nila, hindi sila iiwan, tutulungan po sila. A leaf is also a symbol of courage. That's why I think that the Legal Assistance Fund is precisely like that of a leaf, Mr. President. Although LEAF is intended for our OFWs in distress, it is actually for the 10.4 million overseas Filipinos, including OFWs who are scattered to many places in the world, so that they will feel secure, thinking that whatever happens, they will have adequate protection and support from the Philippine government. Labis po tayong nasaktan bilang isang bansa na sa mapait po na pangyayaring naranasan ng ating mga kababayan, sina Joanna De Mafelis, Jeneline Villavende, at iba pang inabuso at pinaslang doon po sa bansang Kuwait. Hindi po natin gustong maulit ito. Naisabatas po natin yung RA 11299 o ang Social Welfare Attaché Law. Isinunod po natin ang Legal Assistance Fund para maipakita natin sa buong mundo na ang unang nagmamalasakit sa mga Pilipino ay walang iba kundi mga Pilipino rin. Mr. President, allow me to reiterate our thanks and appreciation to all our colleagues for co-sponsoring this bill, Senator Binay, Senator Villar, Senator Pacquiao, Senator Bato de la Rosa, our distinguished minority floor leader for giving us these meaningful amendments that was raised a while ago. We thank also Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lacson, Senator Lapid, Senator Amy Marcos, Senator Pangilinan, Senator Tolentino, and of course, our hardworking Majority Leader, Senator Mig Subili is also author of the measure, for finally calendaring, Mr. President, this measure. And of course, our Senate President Tito Soto. And let me also put on record Senator Angara, Senator Gordon, who also intended to co-sponsor the measure, and Senator Po. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat sa DOLE, sa DFA family, sa patuloy na pakikipagtulungan sa ating opisina, sa ating mga OFWs na walang sawang nagpapadala ng kanilang mga mensahe sa social media bilang pagsuporta dito sa Senate Bill number 1233. Gayon din po sa lahat ng mga organisasyong tumututok sa panukalang batas na ito. Muli, taus-pusong pasasalamat at pagpalain tayo lahat ng ating Panginoong Diyos. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority floor.
Boundary na, chairman ng Committee on Labor.
Dami na yan,
Boundary na,
Chairman.
boundary na. Mr. President, yeah. With that, we'll have to approve it on third reading next week after 3 working days, 3 session days. We move that we suspend consideration of the measure.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
I had approved it on second reading with one condition, Mr. President, that the good gentleman from Bulacan will now be the presiding officer, so that the presiding officer can also sponsor this measure. May I ask for a 1-minute suspension?
Session suspended. Session suspended.
Ayun dyan na si SB. Ano, ready ka na? O gusto mo pabigyan chairman natin?
Pero madali akong buyuhin, boss.
But I don't encourage it.
Kamali ako. Dapat nag-viewing muna ako. Pero okay lang.
Kay Junior?
Okay lang.
Kay Junior na. Oh. Ready to resume, Mr. President? I'm sorry. So, sige. Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session resumed.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar of ordinary business to special order. Senate Bill number 1354 under Committee Report number 49. So moved.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion's carried.
I move to consider Senate Bill number 1354 and ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Secretary is directed to read the measure.
An act amending Articles 183 and 184 of Act Number 3815 as amended, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code.
May you recognize the distinguished gentleman from Zambales, Senator Richard J. Gordon, the sponsor.
The energetic gentleman from Zambales, Senator Richard Gordon, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your kind words. I am energized by the gentleman who is sitting on the podium right now. Mr. President, liar is just as ugly a word as thief because it implies the presence of just as ugly a sin in one case as in the other. If a man lies under oath or procures the lie of another under oath, if he perjures himself or suborns perjury, he is guilty under the statute law. Quote unquote by former President Theodore Roosevelt. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues in the Senate, the Committee on Justice and Human Rights now sponsors for the consideration of this chamber Committee Report number 49 and 6 approval of its proposed measure. Senate Bill number 1354, entitled An Act Amending Articles 183 and 184 of Act number 3815 as amended, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code. The following bills and resolutions relating to the proposed measure were referred to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights. These are Senate Bill number 1330, introduced by this representation, entitled An Act Amending Article 183 of Act number 3815 as amended, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code. Senate Bill number 8, introduced by Senator Vicente C. Soto III. Actually, they take priority because they were ahead. Entitled Increasing the Penalty for the Crime of Perjury, amending for the purpose of Article 183, the Revised Penal Code, and for other purposes. Senate Bill number 28, introduced by Senator Pamphilo M. Lacson, entitled An Act to Amend Articles 180, 183, and 184 of Section 2, Chapter 2, Title 4 of Act Number 3815, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code as amended, and Senate Bill Number 373, introduced by Senator Laila M. De Lima, entitled an Act amending Articles 180, 183, and 184 of Act Number 3815, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code as amended, increasing the penalties thereof, amended increasing the penalties thereof, criminalizing subornation of perjury and for other purposes. Mr. President, for centuries, perjury has been characterized as an offense against the effective administration of justice. The term perjury comes from the Latin word perjurium, which means false oath. In the ancient past, oaths were an important part of religious rites. In the Old Testament, prohibitions against those who give false testimony are mentioned in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, something which the current chair, is fully aware of. At around 1780 BCE, even the Mesopotamian Code of Hammurabi listed perjury along with murder and witchcraft as top offenses. The offense rests on at least two levels. On the first level, perjury interferes with a particular dispute between individuals, and on the second level, it impedes the effective administration of justice as a whole. It tarnishes the integrity of the justice system by diminishing the respect necessary in order to reach the goal of asserting the truth in a particular case. Perjury became an American crime in 1790. In the United States versus Norris, the U.S. Supreme Court observed that perjury is an obstruction of justice. Its perpetration may well affect the dearest concerns of the parties before the tribunal. The court also regarded perjury as a pollution, an egregious offense, and an obvious and flagrant affront against the basic concepts of judicial proceedings. Similarly, in the Philippines, perjury is committed by any person who knowingly makes untruthful statements and, not being included in the provisions of the crimes of false testimony, shall testify under oath or may not make an affidavit upon any material matter before a competent person authorized to administer an oath in cases in which the law so requires. Under Article 183 of the Revised Penal Code, the current penalty for the crime of perjury is arresto mayor in its maximum period, to prisión correccional in its minimum period. It has a range of 4 months and 1 day to 2 years and 4 months. Based on the available records of the Office of the Court Administrator for the period from September 1, 2013 to February 11, the number of cases are perjury, convicted 36, acquitted 98. Mababa. Falsification, convicted 179, acquitted 311. As we uncovered during our committee hearing, a factor for the low case is the low penalty imposed on the crime of perjury. The current penalty for perjury is subject to probation, and the bail imposed is also low, around 6,000 pesos. Given the high cost in prosecuting a crime, like engaging the services of private counsel, and also the time and effort it takes to see the trial to its finality, there is no motivation to prosecute the crime of perjury. It is costly, time-consuming, and besides, they may not be able to get the penalty that they want because he could actually go under probation. Perjury does not only damage the victim of the crime, but also damage the administration of justice. This is most important, Mr. President. The law of perjury was created not only because the man lies or somebody lies, but because he practically impugns the time of the tribunals. It damages the time and efforts of our people. The main objectives of this bill are to deter, one, to deter the commission of perjury, and to create a culture of truth-telling. In other words, you lie, you pay. Salient provisions of the bill are as follows. What we are proposing is to increase the penalty for the crime of perjury, or Article 183 of the Revised Penal Code. Currently, under the Revised Penal Code, the crime of perjury is punished with arresto mayor in its maximum period to be prisión correccional in its minimum period, or 4 months and 1 day to 6 years and 4 months. 2 years and 4 months, sorry. Under Senate Bill number 1354, we are proposing, and let me give a caveat here, we are going high up so that we can debate it here in the Senate. The sponsorship encourages debate in these particular provisions because there are many many unintended consequences. Number one, increase the penalty to prisión mayor in its minimum period to prisión mayor in its medium period, or from 6 years and 1 day to 10 years. Two, that any person who shall incriminate or impute through false testimony or untruthful statements under oath or through an affidavit any person the commission of a crime shall suffer the same penalty as that being imputed. Three, provided if what is being incriminated or imputed to a person provides for a lesser penalty, that what is provided for in the first paragraph, prisión mayor in its minimum period to prisión mayor in its medium period, that person shall suffer the same penalty as provided thereof. Finally, if a person responsible for the commission of this felony is a public officer or employee, the penalty shall be imposed in its maximum period. There are people who come here in the Senate and lie. We end up putting them in contempt. However, we should file cases of perjury against them right away. They give false testimonies and hamper on the administration of justice. We must make a statement: do not trifle with us, don't trifle with somebody's future, don't trifle with truth. Di ba? That's the whole point. During our committee hearing, we really intend to make the penalty higher. However, a downside to this is that this might discourage people to work for the government. But then, that's why we encourage debate. And I hope the Senate will pay attention and conduct the debate. You may see this as draconian, but that is why we have these debates on the floor. And I hope that in the coming days, we can debate this to have more liveliness and more intelligence in the debate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dick Gordon. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you. Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to study the measure further, move to suspend consideration of the second. But before I do,
Yes.
before we do, Mr. President, we recognize the Minority Floor Leader.
We recognize the distinguished Minority Leader, Senator Frank Drilon.
Just to start the period of interpretation, just one issue, and we want to get the thinking of the good sponsor before we prepare on this. So on that premise, will the gentleman yield to just
Always,
to
Mr. President,
questions on
to the
just one
gentleman.
issue?
From Iloilo and the Minority Floor Leader.
Yes, I am looking at page 2, lines 7 to 11. On page 2, lines 7 to 11. Okay. And, Mr. President, if I may, I'll read this on the record and also so that our colleagues will understand where we are coming from.
Yes,
On lines 7 to 11, the proposed measure reads, any person who shall incriminate or impute through false testimony or untruthful statements under oath or through an affidavit, any person the commission of a crime shall suffer the same penalty as that being imputed. Does this mean, Mr. President, that if I impute murder, which is a capital offense, and it turns out to be false, the penalty for perjury is also life imprisonment, and if there is death, it is death, Mr. President? Because I am imputing murder, and if we follow this phraseology, and the imputation is false, the penalty on my false imputation is life imprisonment?
Your Honor, these are the proposals made by our distinguished Senate President and Senator Lacson. And like I said, as a caveat, I thought that we would discuss this.
So, just
but that is
before-
in the natural course of events, that will be the
So
result.
that is what is meant here.
That's correct, sir.
Because, well, I just wanted to clarify that that is really meaning, because then we study it carefully, and we will submit a proposition that this could be disproportionate to the offense being punished, and that it may even come close to being a cruel and unusual punishment.
That was what I stated in the committee hearing, Mr. President. But I yielded to the both senior gentlemen, although Senator Lacson was the only one there. I said I'd rather have everybody discuss this. Anyway, I'm
So
open
I
to
just,
amendments on that score.
I just want a clarification before we ask for more detailed questions. So with that, we suspend our period of interpellation to the next session.
Thank you, Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the well-propounded question.
Thank you,
It
Senator
is,
Gordon.
pregnant with meaning.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that,
Surgery-
Mr. President, we move to suspend consideration of the measure.
1 minute suspension.
Boss, okay lang ikaw na muna mag...
Bathroom lang, bathroom break lang. Bathroom break lang ako.
Okay lang yung high school, approve na natin yung sports high school niya. Issue. Sports high school.
Session resumed.
Mr. President,
President.
just a slight correction. I mentioned Senator Soto with respect to the question of Senator Leron. It's really Senator Lacson who argued for that. Senate President argues for a higher penalty, but did not assert that position, Mr. President. Thank you.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I suspended, I think earlier before the presiding officer had left, we suspended the measure to allow our colleagues to study this measure further. Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration on another measure with the permission of the body. This is Senate Bill number 1086. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, considered.
The status is we're in the period of interpellation. This is the act creating and establishing the Philippine High School for Sports and providing funds thereof. Therefore, Mr. President, no member wishes to interpolate the measure further, but to so that we can proceed towards the period of amendment. I move, Mr. President, I so move that we terminate the period of interpellation.
Hearing no objection, period of interpellation is closed.
Mr. President, may we recognize the sponsor, Senator Sherman Gatchalian, to propound these amendments and open the period.
Senator Gatchalian is recognized for the period of committee or individual amendments?
Individual amendment.
Individual amendments.
Substitution.
Substituted bill. That's correct, Mr. President, individual amendment.
Thank you.
One minute suspension.
Session
Mr.
suspended.
Gulat ako doon.
Okay, okay. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, for individual amendments, Mr. President, on page 2, line 27, add a new sentence. It shall read as follows. The PHSS shall at all times be given utmost priority in the use of these school and sports facilities and infrastructure, which shall be free of charge as long as utilized to carry out the purposes and functions of the PHSS. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 2, line 28, delete the word its and replace it with the word the. And on line 29 of the same page, after the word cost, insert the phrase of the school facilities. The amended sentence shall now read as follows. The PHSS shall be in charge of the annual operation expenses and maintenance cost of the school facilities. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 3, lines 8 to 9, delete the phrase one representative, each from the House of Representatives and the Senate, and replace it with the phrase one representative from the private sector in the field of sports to be appointed by the chairperson upon consultation with the board. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 3, line 29, insert a new paragraph, A, to read as follows: to formulate policies, guidelines, and criteria in order to rationalize the establishment, administration, and operation of the sports high schools under the Philippine High School for Sports system. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
This is a Senator Dick Gordon amendment, Mr. President. And on page 3, line 31,
You are relettering.
yes,
From
yes, and
line
relettering
29.
accordingly, Mr.
Relating
President.
to, all right. Continue.
Page 3, line 31, delete the word council and replace it with committee.
By the executive committee.
Yes, and then I move for an omnibus amendment, Mr. President, to replace all subsequent references to the council with committee. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted. You were affected by the report of the President Pro Tem yesterday, huh?
Correct, Mr. President. Mr. President. And also, I was listening intently yesterday with the proposal of the good minority floor leader in the appointment of the President of the Philippines on different positions. So we adjusted it, Mr. President, accordingly.
Very good.
Mr. President, may I interject with the permission of the sponsor? Senator Pia has a few amendments. Were you able to incorporate? Because she had asked if she can make amendments at a later date, unless you'd already incorporated her amendments.
Mr. President, the amendments of Senator Pia is already here, and I will just read it
Okay, all right.
after.
Very good, Mr. President, thank you.
Okay. You may proceed.
Well, 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
who have distinguished themselves in the field of sports.
DepEd nga. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, I will read the amendments of Senator Pia Cayetano. So again, on page 1, line 4, before the sentence, insert a new sentence which shall read as follows.
Page 1, line 4. Good.
Article 14 of the 1987 Constitution recognizes the role of the state to protect and promote the right of all citizens to quality education at all levels and to take appropriate steps to make such education accessible to all. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 1, line 4, after the phrase "the state," insert a new word also. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 2, lines 2 to 3, delete the first sentence and replace it with, "There is hereby created and established a Philippine high school for sports that shall accept high school students who have demonstrated the potential of excelling in sports to train in a world-class sports facilities which is at par with international standards while continuing their high school education." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 2, line 3, delete the word "this" and replace it with the PHSS. And make this sentence and the succeeding lines as a new paragraph. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 2, line 9, insert a new paragraph which reads as follows. In compliance with Republic Act number 10533 or the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013, the PHSS shall at the same time provide its students with quality secondary education in their chosen track, which shall not be limited to the sports track. The establishment of the PHSS shall likewise not prejudice the creation of other school for sports in different cities, municipalities, and provinces all over the country. The so moves, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 2, delete lines 1 to 18 and replace it with Section 4, Purpose of the PHSS. The PHSS shall offer, on a full or partial scholarship basis, a holistic center for students who have shown potential in excelling in sports and shall provide them with access to education that takes into consideration their training needs. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 2, delete lines 21 to 27 and replace it with the PHSS shall be established within the new Clark City in Capas, Tarlac. The students shall have access to existing sports facilities in the new Clark City. The Bases Conversion and Development Authority shall provide the land for the site by way of usufruct. The BCDA shall also be in charge of the construction of classrooms, dormitories, and other sports facilities and related amenities as may be determined by the Board of Trustees at the new Clark City campus. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 2, line 32, delete the word president and replace it with chairperson. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Subject to stir na lang.
Renewable every 2 years. Pero ang question sa PN, yan, pwedeng forever. Yun lang ang question niya. Pero okay lang naman, every 2 years.
Actually, ang logic yan is, what if we want the sports to be co
Pwede
for
naman,
sports?
aminin na lang natin.
Yun ang logic yan.
actually is a good information.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
President, just to continue with the amendments of Senator Pia Cayetano. On page 3, line 10, delete the word 3 and replace it with 2. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 3, add another representative from the private sector such that it will now read as follows. 2 representatives from the private sector who have distinguished themselves in the field of sports, education, or both to be appointed by the chairperson upon consultation with the board, subject to style, Mr. President. Yes, so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 3, line 24, delete the word corporate. I so move, Mr. President. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 4, line 7, insert a new subsection which shall read as letter F, to determine the conditions of the acceptance of paying students and establish the qualifications and criteria thereof, and re-letter the succeeding subsection accordingly. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 6, line 23, after the word teachers, insert the phrase coaches, comma, trainers, comma, sports, and medical professionals, comma, who are experts in the field, comma. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
And lastly, from the amendments of Senator Cayetano, on page 6, lines 24 to 25, delete the phrase "and personnel with long and vast experience in sports administration, education, and management," and replace it with "and other personnel." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
That's it for the Pia Cayetano amendment, Mr. President. But upon conferring with Senator Gordon, Mr. President, he requested that the period of amendments will be extended until tomorrow, Mr. President. So,
Okay. Majority Leader, did you hear the
Mr.
request?
President, may we recognize Senator Gordon? I think he wants to make a manifestation. Oh,
No.
Tomorrow.
He wants it suspended until tomorrow.
That's correct. I just
Yeah. Okay, with that, Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to see a clean copy of the amendments today, we move to suspend consideration until tomorrow, for tomorrow, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Motion approved.
Che, yung iba bukas na? Yung isa bukas na? Gusto niya na mag-break eh. Yes, bukas na. Anyway, we'll approve that for sure. Well, yung sa Institute, Energy Institute, yung Energy Institute niya. Sige. Okay, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. With that, Mr. President, no other official business items on our agenda today. I move that we adjourn session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Wednesday, February 19, 2020. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none. Session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Wednesday, February 19, 2020.